Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to look at humans' impact on the land that we live on. So what have we done as we have made culture and grown in numbers? How do we affect the land, and how do we sustain that land that we're going to live on and our children are going to live on? So let's look at some examples. There are very few people that would argue that humans have had a huge impact on the earth around them. And the various ways we're going to look at today, many are negative impacts, but also mankind has a huge capacity for positive impacts on their environment as well. And as people decide what they're going to do and choose what they're going to do, they can look ahead and make plans that would have positive impacts as well, not just negatives. First thing we're going to look at in this section, which is on land, the impact on land, is mining. And you have two types of mining. You have surface mining, where you use heavy equipment to remove mountains and then extract whatever mineral resources that you want from underneath the mountains, or the ores in the rocks or whatever. So you can have pit mining, where you simply dig down, 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 and you end up creating a valley. You can also have removal of mountain tops, where you basically use enormous machines to excavate, as you would do, say, building a road, only you're removing the mountain in order to extract the mineral resources. You can also have underground or subsurface mining. Subsurface mining, of course, is not as obvious, not as impactful to, say, the aesthetics of the situation, the beauty of the land or of the mountainside or whatever, but it can also have different types of impact. One of the things it can do is it can pollute groundwater. Both types of mining can do that. You could have an impact to the air quality. You can also disturb habitats of animals, and even displace communities of people that are living in that area that you want to exploit. So the United States and other countries have various laws so that companies cannot just, as they please, extract mineral resources and then just leave the land ruined. And so in 1977 there was a major act passed by Congress called the Reclamation Act, which essentially requires that companies restore the lands of a mine, especially a strip mine, to pretty much the way it could be. So they would restore the contours of the shapes of the mountains so that you didn't have deep pits that could fill in with water. You also had to grow grass and retain the topsoil. They would have to, as they remove the topsoil, store that topsoil and then replace the topsoil so that it would be so it wouldn't just be stripped land, but it would be could grow again. And then lots of trees and things would have to be planted afterwards. So that's called reclamation. There's various other policies in reclamation in terms of ecological, the water quality, air quality, disturbance to wildlife, etc. In underground mining, one of the big problems is that not everything that you take out of a mine is what you want. You often will see at the mouths of mines big piles of gob and slag and other things that are in the rocks that were never wanted. So, for instance, coal would be extracted, and then the slag and the gob, these lesser quality things that can't be sold, would simply be piled up. Well, once you've pulled this out of the ground and you've exposed it to air and water, you can do a lot, because these materials can change the chemistry of the water that's falling through on that mountainside. So you could lower the pH and make the water acidic, which could essentially poison the fish. You can also, whatever other large minerals that are in that material, heavy minerals, could then leach out of those piles and go into the water, and you end up with with orange or brown or very smelly, polluted water that cannot sustain life. And this water is then used will go into the water table and pollute the wells of the people living around that area. So a lot of times, one thing can lead to another negatively. Another huge impacting practice would be forestry, and not just that men would like to use wood, which is totally necessary all over the world, but the ability to cut huge swaths of forest all at once within just the very shortest of time, and just leave it open would expose that land to erosion that would never have been there otherwise. So how you cut down trees is a very important way of sustaining the land. So deforestation is removing all the trees in an area, which then would leave nothing else to, say, hold the soil down, and then the soil could erode very quickly if it were to rain, for instance, on that. So not just that we would cut down trees, but that we would just cut down trees with no thought of the impact that they would have. So the practices of forestry is more important than forestry itself. One of the things that could have a positive impact is that around streams that would, if you could leave a standing crop of trees or a copse of trees, you could eliminate a lot of the erosion that would take place, and habitats for animals and things. So if you didn't just cut all the trees, you didn't do a clear cut, but you left the trees close to a water source, it would act as a buffer zone and be much less impactful. Of course, as human populations grow, you're going to need places for them to live, and as you encroach upon lands that never had people on it or never sustained a huge number of people, so cities that never existed in very rural land that turns into cities. So you would first make a suburban and then an urban area where lots of people would live. You are totally changing the land there, and as you develop cities specifically, you have to be very, very careful of how you do it so that the land itself can provide for the people living on it. So, for instance, most cities are near rivers or near oceans, but people don't want to live in the crowded places. They want to stretch out into the prettier places, and as they do this, you end up with people living in every place, and that's hard to sustain. Another impact of cities is that the more concrete you cover the ground with, the less water can soak into the ground, and you can actually impact the amount of water that people need simply by the runoff that's happening because there is no way to infiltrate the ground. Also, when you have large amounts of asphalt and concrete, you end up with a flooding situation where, because it can't go into the ground, it has to go somewhere, and you're going to end up with all of it going into a stream all at once, and you can end up with flooding events. A serious problem for humanity is the trash that it produces. So in the United States, about 4 pounds of trash per person every day is generated that ends up in landfills. So you just end up with more and more and more trash that will be around for ages because of what it is that you're throwing away often is produced in order to last a long, long time. So you have some things made out of plastic that don't decompose, and you have things that that are harmful when you throw it away. Electronics that have heavy metals in it that would actually cause harm. So the leaching fluids from a pile of trash, from some kind of a landfill, can cause water pollution and air pollution, depending on how you deal with it, whether you're burning that trash or burying that trash or whatever. And just the volume of it is enough to where eventually you would cover the whole world with trash, and that's something that's not what we would want to live in. We don't want to live in a trash pile. Another major problem or a concern is that as we grow more food, we grow it more efficiently. So you can feed more people on a smaller amount of land, which is wonderful. But in order to do that, you are ridding that land of pests, insects, and parasites and worms. And a lot of times the pesticides that you're using to control the pests are themselves poisonous and can end up in groundwater, can blow across in the air to other regions, and cause harm in other places. So they could kill not just the fungus that on a leaf of a plant, but could kill fish in the waters, or birds, or other animals as it goes up the food chain. So how we treat pesticides specifically is very, very important. That brings the authors of this section to the idea of conservation. If we have a limited place and we are growing in numbers, and we're going to generate more requirement and more trash and pollution, how can we then use the resources more effectively and conserve them? So the idea of recycling or reusing things, so that not everything has to be a new plastic covered something that we buy all the time at Walmart, but that we're thinking about not just what we are using, but for the future generations. What is it going to look like when this plastic bag that I needed for 5 seconds is going to be in a landfill for hundreds of years? Those thoughts now can change behaviors and change the way we as a whole culture can work and make it much more sustainable.